Welcome to KTVB Inside the Courtroom, the lori-vallow-trial. I'm Andrea Dearden. Joining me is Morgan Romero and Hidden True Crime host Lauren Matthias. We are happy to have you with us today.
I'm so honored to be here.
And we are going to delve even deeper into this trial because that is exactly what we're doing here. This format allows us to really kind of go inside this case in addition to the daily coverage that you're getting online and on our KTVB app. This allows us to really kind of talk about some of those specifics that we don't get to dive into,
right,
you know, during a daily newscast. And one of those that we talked about it a little bit in our last episode is the idea of faith, right? And I believe we have heard that as a theme throughout all of this, and, you know, essentially potentially a manipulation of that or a kind of a misuse of some of the very fundamental beliefs of the Mormon Church, the LDS faith, being used in a way that folks who grew up in that religion say that's not how we do this.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's fair. Yeah, okay. That's fair.
So tell us your history in terms of kind of what your understanding is and your, you know, growing up in this faith.
Yes, I am LDS. I served a mission, and I also, the mission I served was actually in Kirtland, Ohio, which is a big historic site in the church. And then I was also, for Salt Lake City's ABC affiliate, I was the correspondent in Hilldale, Utah, and Colorado City, Arizona, which is the communities of Warren Jeff, which is FLDS.
Yes,
I realize the difference because I am LDS. So I find myself really drawn to the religious aspect of this case and the extreme religion and what they twisted and what, you know, stayed the same. And it is bizarre. And
that's what's interesting about that is that when you talk about the fundamentalists, and I don't think they have been identified as fundamentalists, but definitely talking about, like, there is, you know, using the same words, and we're going to talk about like a blessing, you know, like using the same words to describe something being used in a much different way in the context of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Is that fair? I mean,
yeah. And when I met you, Lauren, I remember saying, we had this internal battle in the newsroom of, do we call them LDS? Because as you told me, they were in the church, they were going to temple, they were very much practicing prior to their charges.
Correct. They were LDS when the crimes were committed. Chad Daybell was excommunicated from the LDS church after the children were found in his yard. So, you know, just as a fact, they were LDS. They weren't FLDS. They were LDS members going to church. They even went to church in Hawaii. And as uncomfortable as that is for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it's simply a fact. That doesn't mean that they weren't doing some of their own things.
Right. Sure.
But we do have to be honest with that fact.
Right.
Yeah.
And they do very much talk about the spirituality and talk about, you know, especially when you get into this darkness. So let's just, you know, briefly give people an understanding of how did they describe their concerns about end of world, the people that they were interacting with being dark? I mean, how did that start to come into daily conversation?
And how is that rooted in Mormonism?
Right. Yes.
Great questions. And I actually feel like the prosecution is doing a really good job right now. I've been sitting in the trial each day, and I feel like they're doing a good job sort of setting that stage and how it came about. Lori, and of course, as you know, I've been covering this for 3 years, and so I have a good idea as well on my own. And so what it comes down to is Lori Vallow always sort of had a fascination with end times, extreme religious beliefs, and it was LDS based. But you know, not every LDS person is really into those doomsday scenarios. I would actually call it the Book of Revelations, really, which is the Bible, and many Christian denominations believe this, the 144,000, the gatherers, that comes from the Book of Revelation. Or, excuse me, the Book of Revelation. And so she and her family would read near-death experience books, mostly, not always, but mostly written by LDS authors. Some were not LDS, meaning someone claims that they passed away, that they saw visions and dreams and the other side, and then they came back and they have things to now say that they saw. Those were books that she always read. And then, you know, and then it sort of evolved. So I've even attended some of these conferences.
The Preparing a People conferences.
The Preparing a People conferences. The Firm Expos, you know, there was a Preparing a People conference here they came to in Boise. There was one in St. George, Utah, where I was living, where they met, you know. those conferences were not church sponsored, but they were being formed by, I would say, like-minded LDS LDS members who were really into prepping for the second coming of Jesus Christ, the last days. There was also a website that started in Rexburg by Roger K. Young. It was sold to Christopher Perrett, called A Vow. And I know that a good amount of people in Boise have seen this website. It was specifically for prepping in the last days. Buy this, buy that. That is where Chad Daybell met a woman named Julie Rowe. So there's two separate things. There's Lori-Vallow and there's Chad Daybell, and they're both sort of until their roads merge. So with Chad Daybell, I think it was very much this avow. He was given a platform on there to share his dreams and visions. It was very dreams and vision centric. Well, if prophets can be having visions, so can we.
Did he think he was a prophet? Did he? I mean, did he get to the point where he wanted to be or wanted to be seen that way?
Yes and no. So his doomsday style books were fiction, right? And he states that. We have interviews with him in 2007 saying these books are fiction. He told Deseret Book, who was selling his books, these books are fiction. And that slowly morphed. Okay. That morphed into, now we have speeches of him saying, no, these books are real. These books are true. And when he was given a platform on A Vow and preparing a people, that's when he started to shift. And then you think, oh, he's trying to be a prophet. But he actually never says, I'm a prophet. Oddly, I think it's bigger than that. He's stating he's a deity. He's stating he was Holy Ghost in another life. He was stating he was the brother of Jesus Christ. Yes. I would say this is more than a prophet. Right. Wow.
And that's what drew Lori to him initially, right? Was this idea that she was going to follow him, and she's in awe of him.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, they were just both perfectly primed. So you've got this Avow prepper website, Revelation, then you have Lori-Vallow starting to attend these conferences, and they're all finding like-minded friends that are sort of validating these strange beliefs. So there are these extreme beliefs that are they're growing and growing, and they're listening to podcasts. And the biggest podcast, I just want you to know, Denver Snuffer, Mike Stroud, Julie Rowe, they've all been excommunicated from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So I want to lay that out there. These are people that
prior to the podcast or after the case?
Prior to the podcast, prior to the case. These are people that started podcasting and writing books as members of the LDS Church. Then they start this, we all lived in multiple lives, or we can see the future, and the prophets are falling away. There was that sort of, and it's growing, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's oddly much larger than I ever knew.
Yeah. But for folks that don't understand Mormonism, for folks like us that are not LDS, the faith itself does teach you to have a very personal relationship with Jesus Christ.
It does. And in fact, that's one thing I love about LDS theology. One thing I really embraced growing up is we have this prophet, that teaches us and leads us, but pray to God, which I find is it's like meditation. Whatever it is you do, find a space, pray, ask, thank, be grateful, listen to your heart and your emotions to lead you right. I mean, that's what I gathered as a child, and it helped me growing up, I want to say, because I trusted myself.
Right.
So when I was like, I feel like I'm in a bad situation, or there's peer pressure, I'm like, I don't feel good. I'm like, I'm going to trust that. I mean, whether that's from God or it's my gut, it allowed me to say, that's something. But and so that's, I think, the basis of what they're doing here. Yes. And of course, we have this Joseph Smith vision, too. That's our origin story, right? That's also I saw God in Jesus Christ. So
and Joseph is the prophet.
Right. So
but also based on so much, and of course, I think all religions. I mean, we live and we read and we learn and we trust. Right. I mean, and so really all faith is based on that trust and that element of we can't know, but we know, right? And we believe what we know. But to talk also about being excommunicated, so that tells us that, so the church itself identified this group as a fringe, as you are not part of us. And yet that also is a huge part of, I think, of most religions, that community. So they began to form a community, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Outside of the church, and yet still, I guess, identifying themselves as very much a part of this religion.
Yes, and not everyone is being excommunicated, right? Because although it would be nice if the church could be like, excommunicate. Right. That's not how it works. And honestly, you are allowed to have beliefs that are off-center. Like, no one has to believe the same thing.
Every religion has that.
Every religion. Yes. No one has to believe the same thing in the LDS faith. The problem, I think, is when they start to look into that excommunication possibility is probably when people are preaching it openly, saying, the prophets are wrong, follow me instead. Don't do this, do that. That's when I think it becomes problematic for the church, but they're not going to go excommunicate everyone that has these fringe ideas. So that's why they are still members of the church. If they're not out there saying the church is wrong, there's nothing really.
Right.
Well, I want to talk more about what you touched on and what we heard in court was Chad saying that he was delivered this revelation. Essentially, he spoke, and Lori as well, which we can talk about after Chad. But the reason Chad had so much power, and they met at the Preparing a People conference where he was like a well-regarded author, is because he said he had such a personal connection to Jesus Christ.
Yes.
So that is where you have all these people that come around and say, we believe in you. We put you on a pedestal, essentially.
Right. And that's where and that's where they've been primed sort of like this with this personal revelation and vision. And Chad saying, my veil's been torn. It's been ripped. I can see beyond the veil. I can see before life began and after, and I've seen Jesus Christ. There is a podcast where he tells Melanie Gibb and Lori-Vallow that he's seen Jesus Christ. It's very eerie, and they ask him what he looks like, and he's telling them in detail. Wow. And then, of course, he starts this whole past life thing where I was married to you in a past life. I knew you in a past life.
To Lori.
To Lori. Well, and I think he's told a few other women that he was married to in a past life. It was like his line, right? Because that's a pickup line to use. Hey,
I did not know that. Wow.
I knew you back when.
Yeah, and I think he even used it on Melanie Gibb, who testified in court. And I know that we need to talk about her because she's such a vital part of this case and of this group. I mean, no one ever calls them a cult in court, but maybe I'll use that word if that's okay. But it's sort of like, it was like this accidental cult that was forming, and Melanie Gibb was a big part of it. And Chad, before he met Lori, even told Melanie Gibb that she was a past wife of his.
Yeah, and these are people that, their beliefs, like Lori, were already very extreme, and they were already very spiritual people. And then once they met Chad, it just like expedited that. And then it got to Chad's teaching of the light and the dark scale. So before we get into, I think, Lori and her specific visions, I think we should talk about the scale in which Chad believed and taught Lori and others that people are rated as light spirits or dark spirits. And many of Lori-Vallow's family members were considered dark spirits. And we talked about this on the last podcast very briefly, but if a spirit was so dark, it was beyond repair, essentially, and it was a zombie. And then after you tried it, your castings, your energy work, and your prayer, and using your words, whether you were with that person or not, after you tried your castings and they weren't effective, that person was a zombie, and the only way to get rid of that demon was to kill them. So that's what they believed, and we saw that very extensively. I mean, Melanie touched on it, and Zulema really went into detail about the rating system, the kind of rubric that they had of like 4.2 light, 3 dark, and they would rate people based on that, and they would say they were light before, but now they're dark because a demon has entered their body.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, she really explained that, and the castings. And in fact, the light and dark scale. So Chad and Lori meet with Melanie Gibb. Melanie Gibb and Zulema are there.
And Zulema.
Like this is important, right? They're all there together in St. George, Utah in 2019, and they meet at this Preparing a People conference. And Chad, falls for Lori right away. We're married in a past life. I'm James the Less, and you're my wife, Elena. And 2 days after that conference, 2 days, he sends her an email that says, here's our family history, or your family history, excuse me, and has all of her family members rated as either light or dark. And while Charles, her husband, was still light, right, because he hadn't become a zombie yet, Tylee, her daughter, was a 4.1 dark, which people are like, what does 4.1 mean? Well, you need to study Chad's scale because you would know.
Yes. Right. There's a lot.
That's very dark.
It's very dark.
That's the darkest you can
I mean, the decimal system, even. I mean, he's got a decimal system. I mean, he's just trying to make this so scientific.
Do we know what that was based on? So when, he has only met Lori, you said 2 days now. What's the thought process? Is that he needed to separate Lori in some way from family or from the people that potentially would be a hindrance to his connection with her? Or how does Tylee get to be that dark and he's never met her?
Perhaps. I mean, yeah.
He may have had a motive at that point. I think we'll learn more about that in his trial because they are separated. And I think they're not really getting into that in this trial because it's Lori on the stand. I don't know if you've learned that. I mean, you interviewed his sister-in-law. Did she speak to that?
She did speak. Well, she didn't speak to Tylee because you're right. These cases are very much divided. I mean, Lori is from Arizona, Chad's from Idaho.
Right.
There were two different groups forming in these different states. That sort of like their worlds just like
because there's a big LDS population in Arizona, and I think a lot of people don't maybe know that if they're not familiar.
There's a big one, a big population in Arizona, and so but back to yes, I've spoke to Chad's sister-in-law, and she really never even had met Lori. She was only able to give us Chad's side, but you're right, Melanie Gibb and Zulema are, I think you're right, that the court now, or trial now, is really focusing on Lori. But Zulema and Melanie are interesting because they knew them both. Right. They trusted them both. And it is interesting because I think the prosecution's really trying to show that Lori was responsible for these beliefs and teaching Zulema and Melanie Gibb. Right. But we also see that Chad in court was really teaching Lori, who was teaching.
I think it was... I just lost sound. Sorry about that. I think it was, at least from what I've gathered from testimony, it was Chad's beliefs and teachings. And Lori was on that track on her own, but it was that scale and the needing to take people's lives based on that scale, allegedly, right? I think that was him.
Well, and then obviously, almost aggressively, or almost, what you would see. We look at that in other investigations when almost is predatory. I'm going to use that word, my word, not anywhere else's, but almost in a aggressive nature of you need to know this. This is important that you know this, and we need to save you from this.
Right.
I mean, within hours of knowing this person, right? Within knowing so quickly. So Melanie Gibb on the stand, you talked about her being a crucial part of kind of bringing all of this together, not only because of her being there initially when they meet, but also because she was the person that they asked to lie, right, and ignore law enforcement. So let's talk about some of that. Like, what is her real message here? What did she bring to this trial?
Yes, so much. And right, she knew Chad and she knew Lori, and she sort of introduced them. And I also want to say they showed. I mean, what didn't they show at this trial? God bless those jurors. I can't imagine what they're feeling right now. But they also showed a trust scale, and Melanie Gibb is a top trusted member of this inner circle. So she really is important. Yes, they asked her to lie to police. So she came on the stand. She was there when Chad told Lori that Charles had become Eplos or Ned Schneider, and then turned
Garrett.
We learned it was Garrett, and then it became Ned Schneider, and then it became Eplos. It looks like Hiplos, but they're like, the H is silent.
The H is silent, yes. I forgot
very
that.
Specific.
Yes.
And so Melanie was watching this all come about. And then also, though, Melanie was living with Lori in her house in Arizona right before Charles was killed. And Lori said, hey, you need to leave because my brother's going to come over to protect me from Charles. And this is after they've been having what they call castings. I think they're better known as exorcisms. I mean, is that a fair word?
Valid, totally valid. It was like witchcraft hearing about that.
Yeah, it was witchcraft. And so they would gather, and it would be Zulema, it would be Melanie Gibb, and this is all happening in Arizona with Lori. And Chad would be on the phone from Idaho telling them what they needed to do and how to get the zombie out of Charles, and they would all hold hands, and then they would all have a saying, and then they would seal it with an authority, and thus then they would call Chad back to see if it worked.
And he wasn't there. And he wasn't with Charles.
He had a vision, or he would know, or he would receive a message that would let him know.
And he would say it worked or it didn't work. Yeah. And 2 times it worked.
Right. But it didn't really matter.
Because
it's just a more powerful,
a new spirit,
a more powerful spirit,
a darker spirit.
And these castings, we talked about this in the last one. I don't know how much we've touched on this yet. Their energy work, their prayer, and Zulema Pastenes, who is Alex Cox's wife, Lori Vallow's brother, who we spoke about on the last podcast, who is also dead. Zulema believed that when they said, if you can't get the zombie out in this casting using your words and energy work, you have to burn, bind, use water, whatever way, whatever elements, because she was the element one, according to Chad. Yes. Whatever elements you need to use, you use those. And so when the prosecution was asking her those questions, we were going, whoa, whoa, whoa. She's saying that they have to kill the body, get rid of the body by burning or drowning or binding. Tylee was found burned. JJ was found bound by duct tape. But then the defense comes up. I don't know if you were confused by this, Lauren. I was so confused. I don't know if you were there for this, actually. But the defense comes up to cross-examine. And they said, did you did you really think that they meant physically do these things to people? Like burn them and drown? She said, oh, no, I thought we were supposed to use our words. I thought they only went so far as using their words.
Like metaphorically.
Metaphorically burn. I use fire to burn the person's body. That was very confusing at the end of the day on Friday.
That was, because this is a group that does not seem to believe in metaphors either.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Right.
that's actually something that I think sets maybe many religious people apart from them. Like the veil is a good example. I learned as a little girl growing up with LDS faith that there was a veil that allowed me to not remember the pre-existence or God. I thought it was a metaphor. It's symbolic. I don't think that a brain surgeon opens your brains up and opens your skull up and says, there's your veil.
Right.
Yeah.
Where Chad is having a near-death experience, claiming to, and he comes out and he goes, my veil was torn just a little bit. Like it's so
Like
literal.
a literal, exactly.
Yeah, everything is so literal with this group. The
Right.
scale is so literal. So it is hard for me to believe that all of a sudden something becomes a metaphor all of a sudden. And maybe it was. Maybe it was to her. But
And maybe, I was going to say, maybe in Zulima's mind, thinking, if that's the quote-unquote normal way of looking at her, how most people would see that, potentially she's thinking, that must be what they mean, is metaphorically. And in fact, we've heard that from, we talked a little bit in the last one about Alex Cox's very first wife talking about, he would say he was going to kill somebody, or he was going to, and I thought that he meant just words, words, oh, I'm angry. Not I'm actually going to physically go and commit homicide. So
right.
I think again, in hindsight, and in hindsight, probably things do change a little bit when you have a completely different context.
And I think the Alex Cox relationship, I think this is a good time before we get into Lori's more religious beliefs with her being spoken to and her spirituality. I think we should play part of the patriarchal blessing. And I know, Lauren, you know quite a bit about this.
So let's talk first before we play it. What should this, or what is this used, in the mainstream, the church that you know and that you grew up in? How are these blessings used?
Patriarchal blessings.
Yeah, no, and thanks for asking me. Yeah, this actually really affected me listening to this in court. Nobody had heard this, not even the victims. We had read it through some FOIA docs from Chandler. No one had heard it, and it was a lot different even hearing it. It was more chilling. A patriarchal blessing is something known in the LDS church. It's given to by a stake patriarch. That's someone that's called by even other authority even above him, that is given the authority to give people blessings of guidance. And it's sort of a coming of age thing for maybe teenagers. I mean, some adults too. Whenever you're a convert, it doesn't. There's no exact age to get it. I received mine at 14, and it's. You go to the stake patriarch, the assigned patriarch, and he lays your hands upon your head, and he gives you this sort of blessing of guidance in your life. I think it's things like you will serve, you will do good works, go forward in faith. I mean, those are the type of things you hear in a patriarchal blessing, and you can read it for comfort. Chad is giving a patriarchal blessing, and that's what he calls it, to Alex Cox. I need to say that he is not, nor has he ever been, a stake patriarch. So red flag number one, that this is so fringe. This is so beyond, the scope of the LDS church. And then he also states in the blessing that he's giving the blessing through the church of the firstborn. That's really important to point out too. That he's not saying through the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is what most patriarchal blessings say. He's saying through the church of the firstborn, meaning they believe that they're sort of starting this sort of new church. And the church of the firstborn is mentioned in Scripture, both the Bible and Mormon Scripture is, maybe like a church that is formed. It's Christ's church. It's Jesus Christ's church. And
Not
so that
after
was
the second coming of Christ.
Yeah, long after the second coming of Christ. It's like that, and then we'll all join in the church of the firstborn. It's just, again, it's a symbolic, Christ's church will all be together as one. He is saying that he is the patriarch of the church of the firstborn.
Right. And so he's, again, elevating himself also to a status of, that I am able to give this blessing, and that I have insight and information about you that only I can share.
Going back to the fact that he had told people he was James the Less in his previous life, and he was,
Jesus
directly
Christ's
connected
brother.
to Jesus Christ.
He was the Godhead. He was the Holy Ghost. I mean, what isn't Chad Daybell now at this point? And I want to say this too. I think everyone was, you two aren't LDS. I would love to I'm sure you guys found this really chilling. I was sitting next to a friend. She is former LDS. She's left the church. I am LDS. We both talked about it, and we were both really triggered. I think anyone that is Mormon, and by that I mean ex-Mormon, active Mormon, Jack Mormon, whatever you are, I think everyone with this Mormon background was really extra triggered listening to this, because it just sounds so like what you know or what you hear. It was very upsetting.
But in a way that seems very damaging.
Very damaging, very manipulative, very predatory, as you said, to use your word. It was,
Let's listen in as Chad Daybell, and I believe Lori was there with him, delivering this, what he called his own patriarchal blessing to Alex Cox, Lori's brother.
Anyone else who seeks to oppose you, you'll feel a new vitality and strength against them, and to use your priesthood to defend against them. I close this patriarchal blessing by assuring you that you will rise to an eternal glory, and that you will have an eternal family, and that your exaltation is assured through your faithfulness. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.
Just a portion of the blessing. It was rather long. We just played the last
15 minutes.
45 seconds or so. So much more to that. And there was, he sounded emotional in it, right? I mean, you could hear,
they were emotional.
You could hear crying or what sounded like tears. What do we think that's about? Or what do you think that was really, what was the message there to Alex?
Well, we heard through his wife, Zulema Pasterna's testimony, that he really believed what Chad was telling him. He wholeheartedly, until the days before he died, the few days before he died, that he was sent on this earth to be lori-vallow, to be his sister's protector, to be his sister's savior, and that was his main job. And then it wasn't until Tammy Daybell's body was exhumed a few months after she was allegedly killed, that he said, I believe I'm their fall guy. So he had thought he was their savior. And this is very emotional for him, because him and his sister have always been very close. And this is he had ascribed to the same religious beliefs, and he was sort of going that direction. He had also been a part of this group that had done the castings and believed these things as well. And then it wasn't until his final days, when he learned Tammy's body was dug up and they were doing another autopsy, that he thought, I'm their fall guy. And then he said to his wife, and they talked about this in court, I'm either a man of God or I'm not. And he died the next day. That was eerie.
Yeah, he did die the next day. And in that patriarchal blessing, I actually thought this was a great moment from the prosecution. It was sort of like this mic drop at the end of the day. Like, listen to this really eerie 15-minute blessing, which Chad is stating that you are Lori's protector. He also says in the patriarchal blessing, you will know when it's time to go to the other side. It says, you have already accomplished great tasks for us. At this point, the children are dead. He then says that he will save souls and be known for his goodness. So mind-blowingly.
You're a warrior.
You're a warrior.
You're gonna get other warriors.
Yeah, you're gonna get married. He's not yet married to Zulema. He doesn't get married to Zulema for another week. So it's all very it's very prophesying, but not because he's a prophet, but because he's essentially telling him what to do, and all these things happen. And so then the blessing was given November 24th, 25th. Tammy Daybell's body is exhumed December 11th. Chad and Lori are in Hawaii. They call him, and he's at Zulema's house. They're living together now. They eloped in Las Vegas after this blessing was given. They've been married 2 weeks. They call and say, hey, Tammy's body is being exhumed. At that point, Zulema's like, what did you do? Are you involved?
Yes.
What happened? What is it? Are you involved in Tammy's death? What's going on? And then he's quiet, and he won't say anything. And then, as you said, Morgan, he goes, I'm either a man of God or I am not. The next day, we do know, this has not been said in court, in trial, but the next day we do know that Chad Daybell called Alex on the phone and gave him another blessing. A few hours later, he was dead.
And they say blood clots, correct?
Blood clots, pulmonary embolism, a lung clot, a blood clot in the lung. That is the autopsy. That's the final autopsy. He's been cremated.
Okay.
I don't think we're ever going to know. They say his death was natural, but decide for yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's just eerie, this trail of death. But Lori, I think the Zulema testimony is interesting. The Melanie Gibb testimony is interesting because Lori herself also became this sort of, believed she was this deity in a sense as well. She said that she had received these revelations and she had spoken directly to Jesus Christ. He had visited her, and the angel Moroni, who's also a main figure in the Mormon faith as well, the angel Moroni had visited her as well and spoken to her. And so she's telling these things to Zulema, and Zulema testified, and Melanie, she had testified to the fact that, when asked, did you believe, Lori, and why? She said, I would never think that somebody who told me these things that were so sacred about my faith could ever lie about anything.
Would make that up.
Would make that up or would make anything else up.
That was a profound moment.
Yeah, very much so.
I thought, maybe it was because she followed Gibb, but I actually really liked Zulema's testimony. I was believing her. She was more believable than I've ever thought she might be.
That was the first time we've heard from her.
Yeah, we've seen police interviews maybe and FOIA docs, but not right in front.
Well, and I think initially, I think of everything I've seen, and it has been very limited, but I always thought of her as being sort of a cursory person and essentially going to kind of go along with whatever Alex and whatever Lori, kind of whatever was happening, but wasn't really in the middle of everything. And I think this was the first time that you really got some insight into her own questioning and her own revelation that perhaps my trust was very much misplaced, and what I relied on, that faith, was a problem.
Yeah, she said, why would I not believe Lori if she said she saw Jesus Christ? Why would anyone lie about that? And you have to go back to the LDS origin story. It starts with somebody seeing God and Jesus Christ, and we are taught to believe that. Have faith, believe that, miracles happen. So I felt for her when she said that. And
that's part of what I can't help but kind of play out in my head as well, because there is a manipulation of, you talked about, people calling and messages and really, trusting in what people tell you. The fundamentalist, that idea that they need to be called to higher power and multiple wives and things like that really do ultimately equate to higher place,
status,
higher status, right? So it's this idea that I am bettering myself, and there's that manipulation of, I'm doing this for you. And yet, obviously, the message being shared by prosecutors is that's what he said, but in reality, all the while, all of this was to protect Lori and Chad from their own criminal behavior potentially.
Right. Yeah. They said that. They all wanted to be light. They all wanted to have. They all wanted to feel special. I think that's the one thing they all have in common here is this desire. And as humans, we want to feel special. So I get it. We want to be special. We want to feel that we matter. And these were people that had a very deep need to feel special, and Chad and Lori were making them feel so special. You are light, you are powerful, you control the elements, you're gonna lead people. Alex, your sins are forgiven, and he weeps. It's people that are longing, and it's so manipulative, and so they want to believe it.
I think it's sad too, because even on the stand, you hear these women that were very much very close to these individuals. And they're probably questioning everything they ever knew and everything they ever thought. I mean, that's what the sense I got. I wasn't in the testimony that Melanie gave, but seeing Zulema and her being asked, do you still believe them? And her going, no, I don't trust a thing that they said. They're like, do you still believe any of the things that you believe? And she said, yes, I do. It's not like she's not LDS anymore, but how can somebody take something that you cherish so dearly prior to meeting them for the first 40 years of your life, perhaps, and then it just to go that far down, Zulema saying, I never thought that it would lead to death.
What do we know about Melanie? Because initially Melanie did exactly what they asked her to do. So, at some point I feel like we even see her, we have some insight into her decision point along the way, starting to think, wait, I have to think for myself, and I can't just follow what Chad and Lori are telling me. As Alex said, I'm about to get myself in trouble. I mean, talk about
she was very
about that
she was very extreme
spectrum.
though too. I think we can't be remiss to forget that she is very her beliefs were very extreme as well. Like
her
Lori's.
beliefs were very extreme. They were always very extreme. They're extreme now. I actually see her on the stand and even in police interviews doing a little bit of disassociating because of what you just said, this complexity with Zulema, realizing I believed everything and now I'm going back to my older beliefs, but it's complex. I feel like Melanie, because her religion is so intertwined into her identity that she almost can't say she ever believed them fully. And I think that's how she's like making sense to herself. She clearly believes so much. We've seen the text. We see that she's calling Lori mom in text, which, you know, Chad said you were Lori's daughter in a past life. We see that she's going to all of these castings, but on the stand, and I don't know if you agree, but I feel like on the stand she was like, oh, I don't know, I didn't 100% believe him, but I totally believe the LDS church now. I think she's trying to backtrack and make sense of it herself to like imagine that she could have never fallen for that. But oddly, I don't think that works in her favor either, because I'm like, if you weren't 100% sure, then why didn't you do anything?
Did you think that she ever, not to put you in a position of assuming, but did you think that she ever thought it would lead to people dying?
I don't know. There were, you know, when she was asked to leave for Charles, she was there from the very beginning. She was so close to Lori. I have a hard time, and I'm not going to assume anything, and I'm, you know, I don't know. I don't know. You know, all of these people are really difficult. I think overall I'm frustrated that 2 children lost their lives, and if just one of these adults had said something, it's hard not to feel angry. So I try to have compassion, listen to their stories, but then I just sometimes feel really upset.
And as we said, we're humans, and so it is very, very difficult not to put yourself in a position where you have a really hard time finding a way that it makes sense. Or that finding a way that you wouldn't have had some little twinge, you know, some little instinct or some little intuition that said something's not right. And it is very difficult to not feel like multiple people along the way really did kind of turn a blind eye or choose not to listen.
Yeah. Well, Melanie was told, don't ask. And Zulema was told, don't ask where the kids are. Don't ask what happened to them. And then she was told, or Melanie specifically was told, you know where they are.
This is what I have the hardest time with Melanie Gibb, or trying to wrap my mind around it. And she talked about this in trial, and she's talked about this in police interviews. She was there with David Warwick when JJ lost his life, allegedly.
Yeah, she was in Rexburg.
But she was sleeping at the townhome that night with David Warwick, her boyfriend, in the same bed. The last time they had seen JJ, it was September 22nd, 2019, and they saw Alex carrying JJ asleep on his shoulder up to Lori's bedroom. And then in the middle of the night, David allegedly, according to Melanie Gibb, has a nightmare. And the nightmare is so bad that they both wake up and they are knocking on Lori's door. I mean, this is the last night JJ's seen alive, so this is very, like, they've learned that they've called him a zombie. They learned the night before. Lori's calling her son a zombie. They know what happens to zombies at this point, right? Like, they've got to know, like, look what happened to Charles. And so they're knocking on Lori's door, and it's locked. And then they're calling Chad. They call him on the phone, and they call Lori, and no one answers. And that's her story. And so I'm going to listen to Melanie's story, and it hasn't changed. I've seen it in police interviews. I saw it in trial. But it's very hard for me to not wonder, what did you hear? What did you know? What was this nightmare? Those are the things that go through my mind. And then after she lied. She lied to police.
She lied to police. And then eventually it was 3 months after the kids went missing, after the kids were allegedly killed, correct? Police believe they were both killed in September. So 3 months later, she then comes forward to police and says, he was not with me. JJ was not with me. We were not seeing Frozen 2. You know, Lori and Chad asked me not to answer the phone and to lie to law enforcement.
Right. And she was with David Warwick then, you know, when they called, and she was upset, you know, but she did lie. She said, oh, he's not with me anymore. He was. And then she also admitted on stand, you know, this is what a lot of people I think suspected, but she also did say on stand, yes, it was a self-serving, when she recorded that call that we all listened to between her and Lori and Chad, and I'm so glad she recorded that call. It's such an excellent piece of evidence, so thank you to Melanie Gibb. But she did she did admit that it was a self-serving call. that she was doing it
to get herself off.
Yeah, she realized she was going to have to go to police. The police knew things. And so before she goes to police, she's like, I'm going to call so that everybody knows that I didn't know where JJ was.
Right.
And she did admit that.
Like you do that, sometimes people will, the law enforcement even will use that as a, confrontation call or trying to get information or evidence. And so she did that on her own.
Yes.
And said, self-serving, I'm going to essentially get on record everything I can to protect myself before I go to law enforcement with this information.
Right. And it was a great call. I'll give her that.
Yeah, it was, and we listened to it. And I think, too, you talked about the zombies. Basis for everything. I think as we wrap this podcast, I know there's so much more we could say, but that is the basis. They thought, allegedly, according to the prosecutors say that Chad and Lori believed, as they expressed to Melanie, as they expressed to Zulema, as they expressed to others, that JJ and Tylee were evil spirits. Tylee they called Hillary. JJ, it was like in the final days of his life that he was possessed by an evil spirit. And he was autistic. We know JJ was autistic. And Lori said he was smarter. He was putting sentences together. He was speaking differently. He was climbing on top of things. And that is the prosecution's case for why they believe they killed them.
Demonizing, at some point, demonizing them in a way that made it, again, justification that this was the only way out, was that was to take their lives. So we so appreciate your insight, and thank you for sharing your faith and your understanding of everything, and then also, of course, covering this trial. We hope to have you back as the trial continues. We would love to be able to use you as another expert in this case, and we appreciate that insight, Morgan, and we will continue to cover this case inside the courtroom as it proceeds, as we get into week 2 of testimony, what we think will be a 8 to 10 week trial. So if you are, we're following along at home, we are already into a lot of the complexity, and there is a lot more to come. So lots to unpack, and we appreciate you being here to do that alongside of us. So have a great day.